online presence for people. As we know, with times ahead, if people are unwell, it's important that they can still stay connected to what is happening, but not bring their bugs to share with everybody else. So we will still have a Zoom availability for councillors as needed, but we are looking forward to working back together in the same room. So just noting that the meeting is being live streamed, and if you can let myself or the democracy advisor know if you intend to leave the meeting, it would be great. So I've got here that we will have a break at 10:45 and then around 12 for lunch, but I would be very surprised if we're even still having our meeting at 10:45, but just so you know those timings if they're needed. And I would just like to announce that item 2.1, the COVID-19 response projects paper, has been withdrawn from the agenda. A media release has just gone out, as people will have seen. So on May the 7th, councillors approved projects for submission, and at that time no one had any idea of what was ahead, and that this week we would move to level 1 in many ways a very rapid transition for our country, and with no requirement for social distancing. That was a surprise to us all. So this really has been a most unusual time that we've all lived through, and it's required some quick movement and quick response from council. I think it's also worth noting that councils around the country are being advised to remove the temporary infrastructure that was put in under emergency powers. I also would like to say that I know that councillors would like to acknowledge everyone who submitted on these projects. We really appreciate the participation of the community. We received overwhelming positive feedback, and that people told us that they would like this infrastructure regardless of COVID-19. COVID-19 is a good reason, but there are other reasons too. There were also people who had concerns and who added constructive ideas to the process. So as has been announced in the media release, council staff are working together with NZTA to reframe several of the COVID-19 projects as innovating streets trials, which is wonderful news. And that council will reconsider or consider a paper on these revised projects in August. I would like to acknowledge the hard work of councillors Condi and Free. It's been a really tough process to work through, and I really admire you sticking with it and pushing hard and working with the staff constructively to make sure that we still make gains, because we know, and we will hear from people in the future, that these are important projects. I'd like to acknowledge that work, and I would also like to acknowledge the work of our staff who have worked so hard under really difficult conditions to try and bring these projects together. As I say, it's been a very challenging time for everyone, and I think it's really important that we acknowledge that hard work. And the key thing here is not all has been lost, that we will continue, and we know that we need to look at our city and improve our infrastructure. So I'd like to thank everyone for their hard work on this, and we will now move into the meeting process. So I'd like to ask if we have any apologies for this meeting. No, so we'll move on. Any conflict of interest declarations? And now I'd like to confirm the minutes. So I move the motion that the Strategy and Policy Committee approve the minutes of the Strategy and Policy Committee meeting held on the 4th of June 2020 having been circulated, and that they be taken as read and confirmed as an accurate record of that meeting. Do I have a seconder? Deputy Mayor Free, thank you. So I'm now going to put that motion, which has been moved and seconded. Can you please vote accordingly? Looks like we're still waiting. Who are we still waiting for?
That's unanimous. Councillor O'Neill is not currently in the meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. Now there are no items, sorry, that was carried. There are no items not on the agenda. We do have a couple of public participants this morning. So, and this is in regards to the Safer Speeds Hearing Subcommittee meeting. These two participants were not able to attend the subcommittee meetings to submit, so are allowed to come and tell us their views at this meeting. So I'd like to first of all welcome Tim Jones, no mai, to share your whakaaro with us around the Safer Speeds paper, and you'll have 5 minutes. If you do want to allow time for questions, that would be great within the 5 minutes. So I'll hand over to you.
Kia ora koutou, and thanks for the opportunity to submit. I've been doing that a bit lately, so I might give you a little bit of a rest after this one. And just before I say so, I want to say that I'm very pleased to hear that news about the Innovating Streets proposals, and I'll look forward to reading this press release quite shortly. So, but here I'm here to talk about safer speeds. Councillors, you have a real chance today to make a difference to the health and well-being of Wellingtonians, because today's the day you get to decide whether you're going to make Wellington streets safer and better. I think you're well aware by now of the reasons why lower speed limits make for safer and better streets. You've heard about NZTA research that shows that a 30km/h speed limit is safer for street users, disabled persons, pedestrians, cyclists, and drivers and passengers in motor vehicles. 30 kilometres an hour makes streets safer for children and young people like my son. It makes streets safer for pedestrians, for alighting bus passengers, for car users. And NZTA research also shows that the economic benefits of lower speeds outweigh the very minimal increases in travel times that may sometimes occur. But those safety and other benefits don't just apply to selected streets in the CBD. They apply to arterial roads too. Yet the proposal currently before Council excludes many such roads. No Kent and Cambridge Terrace, no Taranaki Street, no waterfront quays. The very streets that are most difficult for pedestrians to cross have been excluded. The evidence doesn't support that exclusion, and neither does practice in other cities such as Christchurch and Auckland. When public submissions opened earlier this year, the Connect Wellington submission on safer speeds included a map of a proposed more comprehensive 30km/h zone, including all CBD and Te Aro streets, plus Thorndon and Mount Victoria. And I know that the Mount Victoria Residents Association also supports a 30km/h zone in Mount Victoria. So I'd like to see the City Council commit to a comprehensive 30km/h zone that isn't weakened by arbitrary changes from a 30km/h limit to a 50km/h limit every time someone comes to an arterial road. The current proposal is definitely better than what we have now, but what we really need is that comprehensive zone. If it's not possible to implement the wider zone all at once, then I'd like to see the Strategy and Policy Committee pass the present proposal with strong support and commit to working urgently towards a comprehensive zone, such as that proposed by Connect Wellington. While the current proposal isn't all that I'd wish, I do congratulate councillors for your focus on making safer speeds happen. It's a really big deal, so thank you.
Kia ora, thank you for that. Councillors, are there any questions? Councillor Sparrow, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tim. Did I understand you correctly? You were talking about the arterial roads, and I would have a question about lowering the speed limits in the arterial roads. Anyway, I won't comment about that any further, but did I hear you correctly in suggesting that some arterial roads in Auckland and Christchurch weren't excluded in their speed limits being lowered?
Well, I'm familiar with the Christchurch zone, and my understanding there is that some arterial streets were included initially in their zone, and that based on the success of the zone, they are now including further arterial streets. But I don't have an actual list of those streets to hand.
That's what I was going to ask you, whether you could name any. Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
I can certainly, depending on how council decides to pursue this, I'd certainly be happy to look into that further.
I might too, because I'd be very interested in knowing, I'm fairly familiar with Christchurch, what arterial roads there have had their speed limits lowered. Yep, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rush, if you can make your question quick, we can do that.
Very quickly, Tim, about safety, haven't really seen much evidence that that driving behaviours are the problem. Very thin evidence actually tells us that pedestrians not looking to cross the road are actually a bigger problem. Is there a role for the council to do some education programs for pedestrians and also perhaps for motorists?
Well, I think the answer to that is that, I mean, I'd start from the council's sustainable transport hierarchy, if I've got the name right, which puts pedestrians and cyclists at the top. And that's partly because they're the most vulnerable users. So I think while there's a role for education, the act of both creating this limit, I think there's creating the limit, there's signalling it in terms of how streets are organised. And yes, I think there is a role for education, but it's down the chain of what needs to be done rather than the first thing that needs to be done.
Okay, thanks.
Mahi, Tim, thank you so much for sharing your whakaaro with us today. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Caroline Shaw, thank you for joining us today. So same for you, you have 5 minutes, and if you want to allow time for questions, that would be great.
Kia ora koutou, councillors. My name's Caroline Shaw. I'm a public health doctor and epidemiologist, and I work in the Department of Public Health at the University of Otago in Wellington. I'm just going to tell you briefly about myself and then talk a little bit about the policy, and then hopefully there'll be time for questions. So I research in the area of transport, climate change and health, with a real focus on how we can move to a low carbon transport system while improving health and equity at the same time. And I do quite a lot of work looking at how the transport system can work better for groups it doesn't really cater very well for currently, particularly children and women. And I'm a mum of 3 primary school aged children who love to ride their bikes, loved the experience of riding safely everywhere during lockdown, and would really like to be able to do that every day. What I'd really like to do, rather than sort of talk about the detail of the policy, is I'd really like to acknowledge your leadership on this particular issue around reducing speeds in the inner city, and to really emphasise that this is a key policy to both make our streets safer, but also, just as importantly, to make them feel safer for people, because both of those things are really important. And this, lowering the speeds, is the kind of policy that allows people also to see that our city can be a slightly different place. It can be more inclusive, it can be welcoming, and it can be a nicer place to be because people are at the centre of it rather than cars. And I think one of the really key things in passing this policy is that it will demonstrate that WCC is really committed to starting the journey towards a livable, vibrant and low carbon city. And I'm really happy to answer any specific questions.
Kia ora, Caroline. It looks like Councillor Rush has a question.
Hi, Caroline. Just want to, if I can take the opportunity, quiz you about low carbon transport. Where do you think the technology is in respect to hydrogen as a zero carbon fuel? And
I think it's a bit of a red herring to focus on it. We know what works to move to low carbon transport cities. All these, the things that we need to do are well within our grasp. And
can you just tell me what you mean by that? So is it electric vehicles is what you mean?
Councillor Rush, this is well off topic, Councillor Rush. So I actually don't think it's fair to put a submitter in this position. Dr. Shaw hasn't come to talk to us about types of technology for transport. She's come to talk to us about safer speeds. So Councillor Fitzsimons, you have a question on this? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm quite interested in, you talked about the research you do about women and children, and I'm just quite interested if you can give us the, sort of 1-minute version of the key findings and the impact these sorts of matters have on our cities.
Sure. We've just finished some research looking where we interviewed Māori and non-Māori women about transport and particularly about cycling. And the really key message is that women want to cycle more, but they need to be able to do it in ways that are safe and ways that cater for the ways that they travel, essentially. So that councils need to provide, if we want women to cycle, we need to provide wide cycle lanes that women can accompany their children on, They need to go between the places, connect up the places that women travel between, which are things like schools, pools, libraries, local shops, as well as workplaces as well, because of all the unpaid work that women do. Was that one?
Thank you. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Are there any further questions? No? Oh, that looks like you've been very succinct. Thank you very much for coming and sharing your expert knowledge with us. We really appreciate that. All right, councillors. So both of our public participants today, you are welcome to go and watch the live stream on our YouTube channel if you'd like to see the meeting progress. So now we're going to move on to report 3.1, which is our Safer Speeds Hearing Subcommittee meeting report of the 4th of June. And I'm now going to invite Councillor Condi to introduce the report.
Thank you, Councillor Day. I'm delighted to be able to introduce this report, which recommends from the subcommittee that the council adopt the 30km/h speed limit across many of our CBD streets. There were no changes from the subcommittee in terms of the proposal that went out for consultation. And so for those of you who are on the subcommittee, I'm delighted also to tell you that my speech today introducing the paper is different from the one I gave you last week, just to keep you all on your toes. So really for me, this is about, we all want our city streets to be inviting and pleasant places to be. And whether we're on foot or on a bike, a scooter, or driving a vehicle. And you know, we know when speeds are lowered to 30km/h, that road noise and air pollution are both significantly reduced, which makes it just a nicer place for us to be. We know that people riding bikes and scooters will feel more confident to mix with vehicles when those vehicles are travelling at a slower speed. And this will then leave more space on our footpaths for people who are travelling at a walking pace, whether they are pedestrians or wheelchair users or a 4-year-old on their little scooter. It creates more spaces on our footpaths. So we need to realise that the effect of the way people have designed our urban environment means that only some people can easily access our CBD. But because those are design choices people have made, we can also redesign our streets, our transport options, our housing and public spaces to make the city eco-friendly and easier to navigate without needing a car. Today's vote to lower speed limits on most of our CBD streets is one step in a wider package of initiatives this council is working on to deliver on that vision for Wellington. This reduction in speed will have many benefits for our community, from, as I mentioned, reduced road noise, less air pollution, and also reduced crashes and injuries, which the evidence is very clear on. They will also help support all of our ground floor retail and hospitality businesses in our CBD who are doing it really tough right now. When our streets are pleasant places to be, people linger there, and when they spend more time, they spend more money. And that's exactly what we need for our businesses in the CBD at the moment. Finally, I would just note that this proposal does retain several arterial roads at 50km/h, as we heard from our public participants. And this is a deliberate choice that we've made to designate some of our streets as places for movement that are trying to focus on making it easy for vehicles to travel through our city, and many of our other streets as places for people to be. Obviously, I know this is a compromise that some people aren't happy with, and we will see how it goes once we're implemented on our streets. We can always revisit that. But I think for now, it's a really pragmatic compromise that we've reached that says some of our roads are going to be about vehicular movement, and many of them are going to be about places for people. And I'm really pleased to be able to bring this paper to a vote for at SPC, and Councillor Pannett will be seconding the paper.
Thank you. Councillor Pannett, would you like to speak now? Oh, you're still on mute. You're still on mute, Councillor Pannett. I'm not very good at lip reading, so.
Apologies. Thank you very much. And I've just got to switch screens now so I can actually see the recommendations from the subcommittee. So look, for me, this is quite historic. It was 6 years ago that we had a very narrow vote, a 7-8 vote to put a 30k speed limit through our CBD. That was a difficult debate, and so it's fantastic to see it back on the table. I'd like to extend a huge thanks to the staff who have worked really, really hard on this. I'm deeply grateful for that. Councillor Condi, it's fantastic to have you on board. Your leadership in this area is much appreciated. And I'd also like to thank Councillor Free as well, who's doing such a great job in making our city more walkable and more cycle friendly. I'd like to thank, of course, all present councillors and previous councillors who have supported this too, because there's been a lot of people involved. And of course, the submitters who have given us a mandate for change. Thank you so much for caring and for making the time to submit to us. I would just like really to concentrate on what the future holds. Mr. Chick was fantastic and actually put 2 amendments through for me because, as you will know, I wanted a larger zone for lower speed limits, including in our inner burbs. Obviously, being one of the Pukehinau councillors, I know there is community support for that. So one of the recommendations for those of you just who haven't had a chance to read the minutes is that, that there are a number of areas adjacent to the central area which will be considered in the future, either through Let's Get Welly Moving or through the LTP process. And also, of course, that we will do some monitoring of this change, which will be incredibly helpful. So I think for those submitters who want to change, we have heard you and we have heard that you want more change. We've heard sometimes that the 30k speed limits in our shopping centres have been really good, but they haven't worked as well as they possibly could, and people would like more change. So I will be pushing very, very hard to get some more speed limits. There's so many great parts of the city which would be even better if it could be more walking friendly. And I think I'd just like to finish by saying it does feel like we are living in historic times where there's massive change coming through. And this is just a small part of it, where we are fundamentally challenging the basis of our transport system and where we are making it more accessible for people who have been excluded. So children have a right to be on our streets safely without being hit by a car. Disabled people also have a right to move around our city safely. Older people too, who might have barriers. Those on low incomes who might not get the luxury of working nice office hours and so on. And so essentially, we should be able to have our streets as a place for democracy, for celebrating, for socialising, for doing good business, and not being dominated by individual private vehicles going at a high speed. And I think we just have to remember this really is in many ways, a debate around culture and values and what kind of vision we want for the city. But again, thank you to all of those who have been involved. I'm really grateful, and I'm hoping that this change will finally go through today.
Thank you, Councillor Pennant. Deputy Mayor Free.
Thank you. This does feel like a really special occasion because this has been unfinished business in my mind for 5 years. We failed only narrowly, as has been mentioned, to get it through last time. But in the meantime, I think the city has definitely moved on and our council's moved on. Our population, our people have moved on too. It's no longer acceptable to live in a city where people run the risk of losing their lives if they are in a position, and it does happen, where they unfortunately step out into the road or something happens. It's unacceptable for them to be at such risk of actually dying when we know that if the speeds are slower, the risk is halved and people will survive. We have been through, as a country, we've been through a huge exercise, stay home, save lives, and that's cost us literally billions of dollars, but it's because we value life. And I think we can say slow speeds save lives. So it's, and the point has been made by very many submitters lately, it's our duty to make sure our public is safe. It is actually one of the fundamental roles of council is to protect health, to make sure that we're living in a safe and pleasant environment within our cities. So I think we really do need to do this. I'm sensing a certain, a willingness to do this that I haven't sensed before. I think it is a historic occasion. We can take the time to go a little bit slower, to just enjoy the process of getting somewhere without having to feel like every single last little bit of speed needs to be applied to get there in a rush. this is going to make for a much more attractive and livable city. I recently did go to a city where they were driving incredibly quickly. It was Hamilton, actually. They've got a Cobham Drive up there, and it's also a 70-kilometre road. But generally in Hamilton, what I did notice is the speeds were really quick, really fast. And I felt anxious and a sense of heightened adrenaline the whole time I was there. It wasn't pleasant to have cars zipping past me quickly, and having to cross the roads was quite a fearful experience. And it made me realise that in Wellington already we do actually have some commitment to slower speeds, but this will be the icing on the cake, to actually have a CBD that's a slow speed environment designed around the needs of, much more around the needs of people and people walking, people using active transport, people scooting. I think it'll be quite transformational for our city, and I look forward myself to wholeheartedly ticking that tick. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wolf.
Thanks, Madam Chair. 6 years ago, the vote actually gave me one of the most interesting times on council. It actually should have gone through 6 years ago, and Councillor Coughlin and myself were working the numbers and felt that we didn't believe that it should go through at that time, but one of the on the other side of the argument lost their concentration and voted with us. That actually wasn't a bad thing, because I think that 6 years ago we weren't quite ready, and the changes that have happened in 6 years have been quite radical. We now have micro mobility as well. We have all sorts of different modes involved in our central city streets, and I think that now is the time. I also like the fact that in 6 years, one of our colleagues, Councillor Pannett, has become far more pragmatic in not doing everything all at one time, and is on board with phased, not forced. And I think that phasing changes in a more moderate way is something that is a little bit more tenable for people. In that respect, reading through the submissions, we didn't have the amount of angst this time as we had 6 years ago. We absolutely didn't. People are more accepting of the fact that it was time, and it is time. I don't think this is a difficult situation at all. We had a difficult debate last time, but it's not going to be like that this time. I do agree that this will have benefits for people's health and safety, and we've mentioned, well, I've mentioned the micro mobility, the walking aspects, and also our people who are challenged or impaired in some way, particularly people with visibility impairments and hearing impairments, will find it a lot more. They'll be a lot more confident in coming into the city. So I'm hoping that this will go through unanimously. I think that it deserves to go through unanimously, and I look forward to, in the future, phasing more of what we do, rather than forcing a lot of change through very, very quickly. And I'd just like to thank the officers as well for how they've undertaken this. We've actually learned a lot in 6 years, and I think that that's fantastic. The learnings that we've taken from making a few mistakes along the way, certainly, that's very valuable. So I'd just like to thank all my colleagues today, and those who have been right involved, and especially those of you that were on the took on board the hearings. So yeah, phased, not forced. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to speak now. I just want to start off by saying I'm really sad that it's taken 6 years to make this change, and I just reflected on what Councillor Wolf was saying and thought, I wonder what it would have been like managing the e-scooter debates if we had already had 30k speed limits. I think we would have avoided some really challenging, awkward conversations, because it would have been easier to say they can be on the road, they can be in bike areas, because the movement on the road is slower. So I just really hope that we don't take 6 years to work our way through challenging situations every time we come across one. Obviously, we've had a conversation this morning about a paper that's been delayed, and I have to say been withdrawn. I have to say I really don't accept that we should leave things and mull them over. I guess what I also want to say is I have huge respect and I'm gratefully thankful to our staff for their patience, because obviously they've worked through this more than once now, and I really want to thank them for their work in getting us to the point where we can have a debate where we have majority, if not unanimous, support. And I guess for me, the thing that had an impact on me was an elderly resident saying, with regards to the footpath, and this has a direct, even though we're talking about the speeds on roads, this has a direct impact on the footpaths, as Councillor Condi and Councillor Pannett have both clearly articulated. And they were saying to me, I just don't hear things coming. And even, things that the rest of us would just be aware of, my senses aren't as good as they were, and I don't have the ability to jump out of the way. And I think what we're doing today is we're giving people options to be able to go at the safe speed that they can in the right environment, so that we can make sure that our pedestrians have a right to be safe on the footpath. So I just want to thank our staff and councillors. Thank you, Councillor Condi and Deputy Mayor Free, for your leadership in this, and also for the other councillors last triennium who were really keen to see this through and had to go through a really disappointing debate. Thank you for continuing to advocate, and please keep doing that with all of the other things that we're dealing with around transport and improving our infrastructure in the city. I hope we keep moving faster than we have in the past. Councillor Foon is the next person on the speaking list. I've got quite a list here, so I haven't missed people.
Kia ora tātou. I'm very excited to have the opportunity to vote on this today. I do want to thank our staff for also bringing this forward in light of a COVID response, that we could make our city safer for people to be around. And I also want to thank our comms team for such an excellent result in getting over 1,700 submitters. It was a great campaign and we really got good engagement. And also thank you to the 1,700 or so submitters who told us how they were feeling. Simon, you're right, it was really a clear pathway forward on what people were wanting. Sorry, Councillor Wolf, on what people were wanting out of this paper this time. So that's been an easier read. But what I do want to bring about today is probably the catchphrase of the day was 30 is less hurty. So if anyone wants to take that away with them, and as Councillor Condi has pointed out, this is why we are really here. This is the problem we are trying to solve. Safety in our city is at the heart of this. But actually what I wanted to do was bring around our dated city vision, which actually can still stand. So in 2011, that we wanted a smart city, and that this paper will contribute to a people-centred city, a connected city, and an eco-city, and a dynamic central city. And if there's one thing we are hearing from our businesses after COVID, is that they want our city centre to be a dynamic place that is people-centred and that people can enjoy lingering around, relaxing, spending money and spending time in our amazing cafes and bars. And indeed, we sell Wellington on being the most walkable city in the nation. And so why wouldn't we go all out to really make that one of our key attributes of why you would enjoy spending time in our city? So yes, I'd like to see the 30k go sooner, but I'll save that for another day in order to get this over the line. So for all the mums that told us that they worry about their kids jumping accidentally on the road, all the active transport folks who want to participate but feel exposed and unsafe using the streets, and all of the businesses who want people to feel more relaxed and visitors to come and enjoy hanging out in Wellington, I will be supporting our city centre Safer Streets paper. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Young.
Thank you. Well, some of you will recall that I voted against the lowered speed limits the last time it came up because I couldn't see the point of spending $250,000 on streets where you couldn't get to 5 kilometres an hour. And I still believe that. But I also, I have a number of thoughts. One is we have to remember that our city centre is our economic heart. It is not a playground. Now, I think it's great for children to go walking on the pavement with their parents, but the idea of children playing in the streets, well, you better have a lot of children if you want to end up with 2 at the adult stage. So look, I also accept that cycling is not particularly safe in the central city. I totally get that. And I have a beautiful German bike, and there's no way my children would allow me to go anywhere near through the central city, even though they're going to inherit when I go. But I don't want to tempt the gods, because I do accept that life is a risk. And you have to use your wits when you're crossing roads, etc. So I think if you can't hear, then you should be sticking to the pedestrian crossing, or maybe getting a new hearing aid. But I have accepted that I will support it this time. But the reason I will support it is because we have very constricted central city streets, and we don't have the space to put in dedicated cycleways. And the reason I've changed my stance is I will support safer city speeds, but I will fight against any more cycleways in the central city, because we cannot afford, our businesses cannot afford to have parking taken out. Actually, the council can't afford it either. And so, yes, to safer speeds, but I will oppose any central city cycleways. So that's a quid pro quo. We don't have the space. But the other thing is, I will also fight to keep e-scooters off footpaths. So I would like to have safer speed limits, yes. E-scooters in the streets, yes. Cycles in the streets, yes. And footpaths for feet. So that is the reason I will be voting for this today.
Fantastic. Thank you. Councillor Matthews.
Koutou. I guess I would just quickly note that, you know, many people, a hearing aid is not going to help them because they have permanent hearing loss, and we want them to be able to get around our streets very safely. And I also note that children and parents are part of our economy too, and that not only their parents, you know, wanting to go out to lunch or shop and spend money, but also, you know, the many early childhood facilities we have within the city where children and, you know, school-age children and preschool children are getting out and about in the city. So I think all of those groups would appreciate these lower speed limits. I also, Laurie Foon, you jumped the gun on me because I also wanted to quote Callum McMenamin with his 30 is less Hershey. But he said another thing that really stood out to me later on Twitter. He said how cool Wellington is going to be after we make all these changes. And it was like, oh, that just gave me life. That was everything, because, you know, he really sort of saw that we are making changes to make the central city better, not just for blind people like him, but for the whole disabled community and for all pedestrians and people that are using the city. Another of our submitters talked about how change was hard, and that, you know, it was, you know, one of those things where people object in the first couple of weeks, but then they get used to it and they think it's the greatest thing ever. And we just kind of have to, I think we want to stay more ahead of the public mood than we have in this case. So I think the fact that we had such overwhelming support in a way does show that we are late to the party in terms of what we're doing for the city. But it's still, you know, it's good that we're doing it. And you know, I would also love to see some unanimity around this issue. For me, I guess the safer speeds are part of a puzzle. You know, they're one piece about how we make the city better. And those other pieces that come together are, you know, more green space, better infrastructure for cycling and walking and public transport, you know, making, you know, all of the different projects that we have underway to make especially our CBD more people-centred, easier and safer to get around, but also nicer for people and better for the planet. So I'm very excited to support this. Thank you.
Thank you. I feel like this debate's quite different to the one from 6 years ago. Councillor Rush.
Morning, colleagues. Not wanting to be an outlier in this particular debate, but I have got some concerns about this. Actually, still not sure how I'm going to plump, but I would compliment the councillors have spoken already, been very helpful, and it's always welcoming to hear your genuine concerns and contributions to the debate. So thank you. That's helping. We talk a lot about Wellington being a pleasant place to be. I've lived in a number of different countries and different cities. San Francisco, Calgary, London, of course, and Dubai. Spent lengthy periods of time in each one of those locations. And yet I chose to come back to New Zealand and live in Wellington. And I could still go back to London tomorrow or to any other centre really around the world, but I choose to live here because it is pleasant. The weather I don't agree with, but it is broadly pleasant with wonderful people, really wonderful people. What concerns me though, colleagues, is that the Wellington City Council seems to want to control how I live. I have grave concerns about how, in the name of moral leadership, there seems to be a movement to impose our worldview on our residents. On Tuesday night, I held a public meeting to discuss the pop-up cycleways. I had no real idea as to what the mood of the meeting would be. By that time, the council had pulled the paper anyway, so I put out about 10 or 15 seats. Over 100 people turned up. And I still didn't know what the mood of the meeting was, but I introduced the meeting by saying that the paper had been pulled. A round of applause erupted. These are just genuine, ordinary ratepayers. They're not boomers. They're a broad range of people. 2 people spoke for the cycleways and about 20 against before I had to stop the meeting because it was getting late. Now that says to me, colleagues, that there is a massive disconnect between what the council's data is telling us and what the actual mood of our people are.
Point of order, Councillor Rush, this seems to be discussing the cycleways paper, which isn't actually the paper up for debate at the moment. Are you going to be coming around to the safer speeds proposal at some point soon?
I will uphold that point of order. Councillor Rush, if you could steer yourself towards safer speeds now, that would be appreciated.
I'll steer safely towards the safer. The point I was making is there is a disconnect between our community and what the council's statistics are telling us. So that concerns me. I've seen no evidence that reducing the speeds from 50 to 30 will make things safer because there's no evidence to suggest that 50 kilometres an hour is unsafe. Where there might be reports from NZTA telling us all sorts of wonderful things, but if NZTA really felt that 30 kilometres was the right speed limit, then they could legislate to ensure that was applied widely across the board. I do think that the wider strategy of our city needs to be taken into account. But I'd like to understand, as Councillor Matthews mentioned, how this piece fits in as part of the puzzle. Councillor Young mentioned support for this proposal, provided no cycleways and no e-scooters would be on footpaths. However, I have grave reservations that that's going to happen. My expectation is that this is one part of the puzzle. The next part will be putting in cycleways, will be having e-scooters on footpaths. We simply don't know. We talked about 1,700 submitters and I listened to them, and yes, broadly speaking, most were in support of this proposal. But 6,000 or 7,000 drive a day along the terrace. The AA was wanting the terrace to be excluded from this program. So overall, where I come to at the moment is I want to support my fellow colleagues, but I'm struggling with the evidence. And I'm also very conscious that there is indeed a silent majority out there that doesn't seem to be getting a voice. That might be their fault. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I will listen with interest to others.
Thank you. Councillor Calvert.
Thank you. And thank you, Councillor Condi, for your speech and keeping us on our toes. But I actually think we're all on our toes in terms of any transport initiatives. And also thank you for acknowledging that retail are doing it tough at the moment, and hospitality, because they really are. And we don't want to be in a position where we're literally throwing them under a bus, even if that is only going 30 k's an hour. So look, we really need to make sure that we are supporting our economic hub of our CBD at the same time. I noticed this Safer Speeds was done under Let's Get Welly Moving, and whilst that's fine if we push this out to something, we're here and now as a council making a decision on it, and it really should be something those type of projects should be done by our council. Because what happens is that we have silos occurring, and so we've got this piece of work happening here, and yet another piece of work which is happening, which really concerned businesses, was these temporary pop-up cycleways down Featherston Street, the same place that we are now determining whether we put in a 30k speed limit. And those two pieces of work were disconnected, certainly in the eye of the public, because they weren't joined together. So we need to be really careful about what we're doing. And I know some of you talked about, integrated system and thinking about all parts, but we need to walk the talk as well in terms of how we're doing it. And look, I think taking on board the comments for the councillors who were here previously in terms of when this decision came out, when they were last debating it 6 years ago. And I think that says something about our work program, because we do tend to sometimes get distracted and go off onto other projects. And dare I say it, the temporary cycleways. We have got enough projects on our books to make sure that we need to actually deliver. When I was out in Evans Bay in the last couple of days, I noticed for some reason, Common Drive is still well under construction and has been for some time. So we really need to make sure that we focus on what we've planned, what's been approved, what's been fully consulted on, and make sure we're delivering what we say we're going to deliver. Because most of you will recall at our last quarterly performance review, we had a lot of projects delayed for various reasons, good reasons, but nevertheless delayed. So we need to focus on our core business, and our core business is not solely focusing on being a transport authority, because to be honest, the last few months I've felt that we've had too much emphasis on transport related projects when we are in the midst of an economic crisis. So, but nevertheless, this piece of work actually started before COVID. Good engagement. Yes, I agree with Councillor Rush that maybe we weren't hearing from everybody, but everybody had a chance. And I do know that through the engagement process, that for what we've been told by officers, businesses were written to. There was a lot of public notices about it. And we also heard that the review of the submissions was done by an independent research and evaluation firm, or it may have been our own research and evaluation team. I can't quite remember. It's not clear on the documents that were provided who actually did that, because there is a real skill and there's a professional skill in analyzing feedback, because consultations are never a referendum. It's not quantitative, it's qualitative. And it's really important that we look at what people are actually saying and where people live, where people travel, where people work. And I noticed we talked about people not hearing cars. I think one of the issues that we've got as a growing concern is people aren't hearing the electric scooters or the electric bikes coming up behind. So that's also something that we need to be very conscious about, a sort of unintended consequence. But And probably if you're on an electric bike, you can certainly go close to 30 k's an hour. I've just got a normal bike, but I've still got a bell on it, I have to say, but I never reached 30 k's an hour on that. And look, we talked about hearing from businesses and what businesses are telling us. I have to say, we may be hearing from them, but are we really listening to them and what they need to get through this recovery period, and to help them keep their heads above water? And are we, we're being people-centric. So that also means that we need to support our economy, especially over the next 12 months. So I am going to support this paper. And I also support all of the council's business, just making sure that when we put these proposals to, we have good consultation, we have good evaluation, and we make sure it's something that we can actually deliver. And I believe that this is going to, if it gets approved, it will be implemented in July. So looking forward to seeing the results. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to clarify, because I've been mentioned a couple of times around the people not being able to hear, and the elderly person who spoke to me about that, it wasn't in reference to the cars, it was actually in reference to being on the footpath with e-scooters and just people moving around in general, that as your senses change, you don't hear what's happening around you. So saying that the footpath, really, we want to see the footpath being used in a way that is respectful of pedestrians. That was my point. It's not about stepping out onto the road. That's a different experience altogether. The next speakers, the order is Mayor Foster, Councillor Fitzsimons, Councillor Sparrow and Councillor Paul. So Mayor Foster.
Thanks, Councillor Day. Look, I want to start off by saying, to agree with people, this is historic. And I guess it's partly historic because it's the second time round. If it had happened the first time, you'd have kind of gone, oh, that was relatively easy. But this actually has been quite hard to get to this point, and it's really great that we are at this point. I want to thank all the staff for an enormous amount of work that's gone into this. I want to thank all the submitters, both those who supported it and who have opposed it, for their contributions as well. And also all of you as councillors, and particularly Councillor Condi, for your leadership in working us through this, and the chairing of the subcommittee hearings. And I think in reflecting on the submitters both for and against it, is one of the things that we're not terribly good at doing is we tend to listen to the people who agree with us. And that's something which we're seeing in all kinds of debates. And I hope that's something that we can learn from through the experience we've had of COVID. And we talked about a team of 5 million and all being in this together, is if we can learn from that and actually listen to people's views that we don't agree with, test our own thinking, and then decide where we're going to be, but at least not to put them down because they have different views. I think that would at least be a step forward. So look, I'm delighted that we're where we are at this point in time. As several others have reflected, and I chaired the committee, the Transport and Urban Development Committee, as it was then, when we had the proposal to have a 30k speed limit. We had a subcommittee that again heard those submissions. We had a majority of people who at that time, majority of submitters who agreed with us. Even the AA, the majority of the people who they surveyed agreed with some change. I think they were basically a third said 30k, a third said 40k, and a third said leave it where they are. And they turned up and told us that they would like to leave it where it was, which we didn't think was quite the balance of that. But despite that, the majority of councillors by one vote, and my recollection is broadly the same as Councillor Wolf's, are that the council voted it down by 8 votes to 7, which was a real disappointment, because at that time we would have been a leader in the country. We'd already been leading on the 30k speed limits, rolling them out through our suburban centres. We had Newtown with a 40k speed limit, and we'd also put in place speed limits along the Golden Mile by that stage as well, but not the rest of the central city. But unfortunately now, of course, we are a follower to some degree rather than a leader, but hey, we're going to get there today, and that's great. One of the things that I was just reflecting on some of the comments that people have made, if you ask anybody what they love about Wellington, and there'll be lots of things about, our natural environment, there'll be lots of things about arts and culture, coffee culture, all the things that you could do in our wonderful city. One of the things they will almost always come up with is that it's walkable and compact. And the decision that I hope we will make today reinforces that. because it is about making the centre of our city safer. It's about making it more people friendly. In doing that, it makes it more attractive. And our streets are places where you could go along there. I mean, how many of us can get along from one end of Lambton Quay to the other and not bump into 3 or 4 people and have conversations with 3 or 4 people? That's one of the joys of a small city, but a compact city as well, and a walkable city, and it's a place where you can spend time and be. And Councillor Day, I just wanted to reflect also on your comment about making biking, scootering safer. And I think it will, because I think it allows some of those things to happen on the street rather than on the footpath. And I think that's what we want. And I think that's what a lot of our submitters on those other processes have also said. So hopefully there's a lot of gains out of doing this. I think the other thing is that I think the majority of our submitters this time were much more strongly supportive. I think that the mood is changing. It doesn't mean it's changed completely. Obviously, we have people who don't agree with us, but I think overall the mood is changing towards taking the move that I think we're going to be making today. But the other thing I want to say is this is the right thing to do. And Councillor Rush, you said that it's about imposing our worldview on people, or you thought that it might be, and maybe NZTA should legislate. Well, actually, we are a road controlling authority. That means we make the decisions, but we are guided by the rules that NZTA sets. So if we tried to put 30k on a motorway, we will get told in no uncertain terms, no, you're not doing it, because it just doesn't reflect the reality of that location. I think if we tried to go out and say, well, we're going to put the Keys into it, or Taranaki Street, or Kent and Cambridge Terrace in their current configuration, and that's what the advice of our officers was, we would have to remodel those streets significantly to justify the speed limit. And we would have had NZTA telling us in no uncertain terms that, and my understanding is that that NZTA could actually override us if we were out of line too far. So we're the road controlling authority, but that doesn't mean we can do anything we like. But I think this is about physics, because what we do know, and it's undeniable, it doesn't matter what your worldview is, physics is physics. It is not going to change because you're right, left, up, down, it's still physics. And we know that the stopping distances are much shorter, so that you can stop a vehicle. If you're traveling at 30 kph, you can stop a vehicle in the distance that it takes you to start putting your foot on the brake at 50 kph. If you hit someone, we know that the chances of dying at 30 or being seriously injured at 30 kph are a fraction of what they are at 50 kph. That's human anatomy, that's physics as well. You cannot argue against that. And the thing here is, and it goes back to that different streets, is that different streets, different purposes. Some streets are about vehicles and moving vehicles around our town. Other streets are about people. And this is about the people parts of our city. And I really did like that 30 is less hurty. It's, you know, in Britain, it was 20 is plenty. Similar principle. It's about making it safer for human beings, making it safer for human beings to be able to survive and to avoid being hit. And if I reflect back, we started with the CBD speed limits, and I think every single speed limit that we put in place, slower speed limit, I think I was chairing some form of transport arrangement. We put that in place. We had the coroner telling us when somebody had been hit by a bus that if it had been at 30 kph, that person will probably still have survived, may not even have been hit. And that was the prompter for us saying, let's start putting the 30k speed limits through the central city. And also just picking up on some of the things that Councillor Rush mentioned, we do and have done education about people looking and crossing the road. If you look at some of the stencils that are on the road, and we back that up with plenty of education. We also deliberately designed street furniture along the edge of the road, if you have a look particularly along Willis Street, to try and encourage people to look the right way so they don't just run out in front of a bus or a car. Again, because in that instance, somebody did do that and died as a result of it. So we do a lot of things to try and make the central city safer. And just to finish off with, because Auckland was mentioned, I just did have a quick look at Auckland. Auckland Transport, of course, made their decisions. They do have 30k speed limits, which will come into place, I understand, on the 30th of June in many of their central city streets, but they did carve out some of those arterials, so Hobson, Fanshawe and Nelson, where they all have 40k speed limits. So they've again reflected on different road environments. And the other one that we sometimes get is about policing, because some people say, oh, the police won't enforce it. Well, the police have consistently said, well, some people would argue they don't enforce some of our CBD speed limits anyway, but the police have made it quite clear over time that if we ask them, if we think we've got a concern, they are likely to back that up and to support it. And in fact, just going through Kelburn Village the other day, I noticed an officer there with a speed gun, obviously doing the enforcement, and I've seen that before in Aro Valley as well, and it does make a difference. While it might not reduce the overall average speed a lot, it knocks the top end off. It means that people are no longer driving at 55 or 60, and that's the dangerous speed. So I just want to again just finish off and say thank you, everyone. Thanks, officers, and also thank you for bringing forward the implementation. So originally it was going to be September, and now you're in a position that, assuming that we approve today, it's going to be July, and I think that's good. We want to get on with these things and make a difference to our wonderful city.
Thank you, Councillor Fitzsimons.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to start by acknowledging the leadership role of Councillor Condi. So I wasn't present during the hearings, but I heard from a number of submitters that they felt genuinely welcome and listened to, and that the questions made them feel like the councillors were actually listening, and you played a really important role in that. So thank you. And I guess I also just want to reflect on that we achieved something, and we achieved it quickly. And I'm really pleased in terms of our decisions in this council. And I guess my kids sit around the table at night when we have dinner, and we're trying to teach a sense of empathy in them, which is much needed. And we talk to them about what is one thing that you're grateful for that happened today. And quite often I struggle to go beyond that. I had a really nice coffee, or I went out with lunch, or try to connect it with something we've done. But today I think I'll be able to go and say, we made a Wellington a better city, because I think that's what we're actually doing by making this decision today. And I think that it's really important to remember that there are some genuine, tangible things that we can do to make our city safer and to make it more pleasant for people. And today we're taking one step, but I want to be really clear that from my perspective, this is just the beginning. We need to use the powers that the government have been signalling for some time and are going to implement to reduce more suburban speeds. And we also need to take a particular effort around schools, because we know that schools are asking for us to reduce speeds around them. It is too fast. It doesn't encourage active modes of transport. It makes road patrol for children really, really difficult. We had a situation at Island Bay School just 2 weeks ago where a car hit right into the road patrol lollipop, and it was terrifying for kids and terrifying for parents who are around it as well. So I think Councillor Rush, you raised a point around whether if NZTA thought this was the right speed limit, why don't they just legislate across the board? Well, it's coming. Soon it will be much easier for us to reduce speed limits throughout the city. And I really welcome that law reform, and also suggest that this council quickly responds to it. I also just wanted to talk about, there was some suggestion that this wasn't our core business. I think it is right in the heart of our core business as a city. This is fundamentally about making Wellington the best city it can be. And I think COVID gave us an insight into what our city can be. It really made us focus on people. It made us get outside, enjoy active modes of transport, be in the community, and people saw the potential for our city to be really focused on people and not focused on rushing to get places all the time. And I guess I just want to finally comment around how long it takes these processes to get through. So while this council has been fairly quick at making this decision, and we're going to deliver it even quicker than originally planned, it does take an awful long time for decisions to be made in local government. I know people criticise central government for it being too fast of a lawmaking body, but my goodness, we are behind public opinion on this, and we risk being behind public opinion on a whole range of issues, including cycleways, if we don't get our act together like we have here eventually.
Thank you. Councillor, we're nearly there. Councillor Sparrow.
A lot of interesting discussion so far, and I do agree that if this goes through, it is likely to make our CBD streets slightly safer for other road users, particularly cyclists and pedestrians, and no doubt that is a good thing. However, having said that, reducing the speed limit by 20 kilometres an hour will, in reality, as I understand it, simply reduce the average speed by around 4 to 5 kilometres an hour, because most of the time it's not possible to travel in the central city anywhere near 50 kilometres an hour anyway. But as I've already stated, if enacting this makes our streets slightly safer, that is worth supporting. The list of streets included in this proposal is, I think, sensible, but arterial routes exist for a reason, and I'm glad they are not included, but no doubt we will be discussing that more in time to come, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Councillor Paul.
Kia ora koutou. I'll try to keep this as brief as possible because I feel like it's all been said. But yeah, just wanted to carry on in the thanks with officers, and especially to our submitters. I really loved being a part of the Safer Speeds Hearing Committee. It was awesome, and also there were tamariki there were kids, there were little dogs and stuff running across the screens. It was honestly such a good representation of the people of our city, I think, who were presenting to us. So I just wanted to thank them very briefly. And also, I think from what I've heard, when people think about the inner city and the CBD, they're thinking about it as a place where people go to shop and to work. But for many of us, it's actually our home, and everybody deserves to feel safe in their own home. So I think that's a major part of what I wanted to convey. But also, I just wanted to go back to a point that kind of bothered me by Councillor Rush, where you said, you felt that, and I'm not sure if you meant this in reference to this particular paper or to the cycleways, but just that you felt that WCC was increasingly having more control over your life. And I think the thing that bothers me about that is that sometimes people who advocate for things like personal responsibility or freedom to choose whichever mode you want, or that kind of typical argument you get, it always comes at the cost of other people's rights to feel safe, their right to life, their right to be free from violence and discrimination. And it could sound a bit far-fetched, but man, the stuff I've been hearing over the last week especially, and the things that I've seen and observed living and being around the city, when you're riding a bike, having cars come right up next to you, beeping, screaming at you out the window. I heard a story of someone who had been spat on out of their window for no reason apart from their cycling. I know it's not about cycling, so moving to pedestrians. When you're walking around the inner city, how often do you see people trying to make their way across the road when the pedestrian light is green, it turns red, and then cars just see that as a pass to just speed around the corner? You see old people running to get across the road, kids trying to stay with their families crossing the road. It's terrible, and people just don't feel safe. And so I hope this is, a part of a wider picture to make people feel safe in whichever mode they choose, whether that's driving, cycling, walking, scootering. But I do agree with what you said about consultation, and that there's a silent majority out there, and you're totally right, there's a massive silent majority of students, disabled people, families, women who don't feel safe in our city, and I know that there is that, because when Brent Norris's life was taken, you saw the hundreds of people who showed up at Parliament who were taking a stand for safety on our streets. And so I just want us to remember that I think we can do better with consultation, like you say, and I hope that we do and are able to take into account their experiences. And I hope we do remember that sometimes people's right to choose a mode shift might mean that someone has a better right to living free from that violence and discrimination. So I really just wanted to say that. And also note that maybe the 6,000 people that use the terrace aren't all from Wellington City. So maybe we just need to consider whether that's accurate information and whether that's representative of the people that we represent. So I hope that any consultation that we do and any work that we do is in really meaningful collaboration with residents, communities, business owners. I know Councillor Matthews is doing an excellent job at making sure that their voices are heard and that we have accessible consultative processes. Want to thank Councillor Condi and all of the councillors who have been involved in this for such a long time for all of your work and advocacy. And just want to really reinforce to the people watching this right now that in the original debate on this paper, we did hear that there would be a second tranche of streets to be considered, including Taranaki Street, the Keys and the inner city suburbs. Please know that we will be pushing to ensure that this happens. And I think this might be something that we can all agree on as well. So thank you everyone involved, and yeah, thank you to all of the submitters, the officers and councillors for all of your mahi.
Kia ora. Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to start off with really strong support for this paper and to acknowledge the cost on people, on officers and on activists for the last 6 years while we've been waiting for this to come to the table again, and to acknowledge the leadership of Councillor Pannett, Councillor Foon and Councillor Condi in their own advocacy, and Councillor Matthews for making sure that disabled people are being heard in this process as well. We've also received a lot of feedback from locals about people's own neighbourhood and wanting to expand this wonderful tranche, and I look forward to that as well. And ultimately what this comes down to, I was looking over data that was presented a long time ago, data presented to Auckland City Council and to Wellington region, and it's pretty clear that we have quite a severe problem on our roads and our streets. And as someone with the privilege of mobility, I might not get to see that danger every day. It is likely that each of us have had an awful experience or know someone who has had an awful experience on our roads in this Wellington region, but beyond human tragedy and loss of safety and loss of interaction with our local economy, there's a whole bunch of trauma that comes with that. And to acknowledge the wonderful submitters and the many emails that we've had, and as Tam mentioned, the rallies that some of us have attended in order to gain a better understanding of some of those processes as well. That trauma can stop people going out, it can stop kids being able to walk to school by themselves, and we know that when people are more comfortable in their communities, they feel more a part of it. We reduce social isolation, we get to know our neighbours more. We've seen that through COVID, and we also know that people contribute to local businesses too. So there is a really strong economic case as well to making sure everyone feels safe in our city. And a little bit to Councillor Rush's comment around the control of regulation as well. We live in a ward where we've got some of the trickiest roads to go around. I live in Haitaitai and I travel through Roseneath, and some of the time a little bit more caution would make us feel a lot safer, right? Councillors, today we have a lot of data in front of us that talk about really scary statistics, and we know that even just a decrease in 1 kilometre can mean the difference between a life being in this world today or not, and that will result in around 2 to 3% less crashes just by removing that 1 kilometre there. And I'm really excited to see this paper come to fruition today. We know the full benefits of walking and cycling and mobility. We know about social connectivity and the impact on the local economy as well. So I'm very excited to see this paper go through, and just lastly, to thank all the councillors and officers for the advocacy and a lot of work that's gone in. Thank you so much.
Kia ora. So now I'd like to invite Councillor Condi. She has a right of reply.
Thank you, Councillor Day. I just wanted to echo, first of all, the comments from Councillor Paul that the subcommittee hearing with the submissions were actually delightful. And when I agreed to kind of take on that job, I didn't ever imagine I would be using the word delightful to describe that experience as my first subcommittee hearing. But it was a lovely time, and we really appreciated everyone who came along. And I particularly remember the 6-year-old who was in her unicorn outfit, adding a lot of joy to all of our days. So that was really great. And I think I just really want to talk in my right of reply about the evidence, including the submissions that we've had and how that's been analysed and put in front of us. And I just want to do this from the point of view that Councillor Rush, you said that when you were questioning one of our public submitters, you said that there was no evidence that speed is the problem, that the main problem is that people don't look before they're crossing. And I just want to say, like, I acknowledge that you're right to read the evidence and form your own judgment about the evidence. But I just want to say that you not being persuaded by the evidence is not the same thing as there not being any evidence. And I think that's an important distinction that Council Office has provided us in Appendix 3 to the Safer Speeds Subcommittee paper, 24 pages of evidence that included 15 references to other documents that set out all of the impacts that this effect will have on various, this lowering the speed limit will have on various things around our city. So I totally accept your right to not be persuaded by that evidence, but I think it's important that we say that there was plenty of evidence. I think it's important to also say that, yes, sometimes people don't look before crossing. And I'm going to come back to Mayor Foster's comment that some of the early work on safer speeds along the bus corridors was driven by a young person who lost their life because she was a university student and she had her headphones on and she stepped out into the road without looking. And she was killed. And that was the daughter of a colleague of my father's. And so when Councillor O'Neill says we all have a story or know somebody who knows somebody, that's what this comes back to. Should that young person have maybe not had her headphones on, or should she have looked before she stepped into the road? Of course she should have. But people are human and we make mistakes. And if we have these 30-kilometre speed limits, then when people make mistakes, it won't cost them their life. And that's what the evidence is telling us, and Mayor Foster spoke about that this is really just about physics. And when you're traveling at 50 kilometres per hour, if someone's hit by a vehicle, 1 in 2 people will, if they're hit, will result in a death or serious injury. 1 in 2 people at 50 kilometres per hour. At 30 kilometres per hour, it goes down to 1 in 10 people. 1 in 10 people might result in a death or serious injury. When London reduced their speed limits around the city, they saw a 38% reduction in deaths and serious injuries where they'd lowered the speed limits. In Wellington City, where we lowered the speed limits to 30k on some of our roads, we saw a 38% reduction in all injury-related crashes. So there is strong evidence that these things do make a difference. Speed is the #1 thing that we can control that actually reduces the impact when we make a mistake. And I also just want to address, we've talked a lot about pedestrians and cyclist safety, but I also want to acknowledge we have, on average in the past decade, we've had 14 deaths or serious injuries per year in our CBD streets that are affected by this proposal. On average, 14. Of those 14, 7 were pedestrians, 1 would be a cyclist, and 6 were vehicle occupants. So this is not just about safety for pedestrians, although we've talked about that a lot because we know that pedestrians are vulnerable because we're all flesh and blood and quite fragile really when it comes down to it. But also we have 6 deaths and serious injuries in our CBD streets that are vehicle occupants. So we are also talking about safety for them. I think I wanted to quickly just address the comment about let's get Wellington moving. I acknowledge Councillor Covett that it's a challenge making sure that all of our transport initiatives are joined up at the moment in the best way. And I know that our staff are working really hard to make sure that we are as joined up as we can be. I think in this is a case where it's a really good example of how we're working together with our partners on this. In this case, we are the road controlling authority. As the City Council, we have the authority to make this decision, and that's why we are the ones voting on this today. It's not going to be voted on by any other of our Let's Get Wellington Moving partners because this is our decision. That said, we have the full support of NZTA and Greater Wellington Regional Council in making this decision, and that's wonderful. We really appreciate their support, and let's make it very clear that we also appreciate their financial contribution. Because the fact that this is being delivered through Let's Get Wellington Moving means that we are paying for some of it, and it is a joint project. They are also paying for some of it. And so sometimes Let's Get Wellington Moving can make things a bit more difficult, and we have to work hard at that relationship, and we have to work hard to be joined up. But it also means that we don't have to bear all the cost of this on our own. So there are pros and cons, and I think we're all working really hard to make that work. And sometimes we won't always get it right. I think this is a great example of really great delivery. We've talked about we want to be a council that delivers some things, and this is a great example of delivery. And I do want to particularly thank the office, our officers and staff at Let's Get Wellington Moving, who really did bend over backwards to make it possible for this to be delivered on our streets in July instead of September. After the COVID-19 pandemic, we really wanted to see if we could get this on our streets faster. And I just so appreciate the effort that they've made in a really difficult time when they were already very busy, that this is going to now be delivered on our streets. You will see changes in July, which is so exciting. Finally, I wanted to talk about, a few people mentioned about how we analyse submissions and who we listen to when people submit. And I just wanted to acknowledge that I thought, you know, Councillor Carr, that you mentioned that it's a professional skill analysing submissions, which it absolutely is. And it's a professional skill that I personally hold because I've got a PhD and I did that kind of work for my PhD. And I've been really impressed with the quality of analysis that we've seen in the subcommittee. Whether that work was done by our staff or whether it was contracted, I'm not sure. But either way, I was very impressed with the quality of analysis that was provided to us. I also wanted to say that you know, Mayor Foster, you mentioned that sometimes we like to just read the things that agree with us, but people who agree with us, and we try not to listen too hard to those who don't. And I just wanted to thank the staff, because prior to the paper coming to the subcommittee hearing, I actually went back to them and said, there's so many submissions, could you compile me a document of just the ones that are against this proposal? Because at the moment, my view is I'm going to support it. I don't need to read the submissions that are in support. I pretty much know what they're going to say, and I know that I'm going to agree with them. And so I wanted to thank the staff who went away and very quickly put together a document of just all of the submissions that were against it, so that I could go through and read and get a sense for myself about what the themes of those were. And I have to say, having done that, I was even more reassured that the work that had been done in analysing those submissions was very high quality, and that we can all be confident in the work and analysis that we had been delivered. All of that said, I want to thank you all so much for your engagement on this. I want to thank the members of the subcommittee hearing for spending a delightful few hours together listening to Wellingtonians talk to us. I want to thank all of those councillors who have been working on this for so long, since, you know, well before I got here, and who have gone through this vote now a second time. And just in reference to all of that, before I close, I would like to invite everyone to make sure that they pay very close attention when casting their votes, so we don't have any mistakes today about which way you're voting. Although from the sounds of the debate, I don't think that if someone makes a mistake, it will change the result, but we'll all just stay very focused as we go on to the voting part of the day.
That is a very good call. So now that I have the motion, which has been moved and seconded and very well debated, thank you everybody for your constructive debate. I invite you to vote accordingly. It was a very quick, determined vote, and excitingly, it's unanimous. So well done Wellington City Council and Wellingtonians for helping us get here. What we're going to do now is I'm just going to move into public excluded, and then we'll break for some morning tea. So I'll just go through that process so that then officers can put us into public excluded while we go and have a quick break. So officers have recommended that the public is excluded from the following part of the proceedings of this meeting. So according to the information and the reasons outlined in our agenda, I'd like to move the motion. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Fitzsimons, thank you. So I now put the motion, which has been moved and seconded.
Hang on, I'd like to debate this,
I need to allow some debate. Sorry, yes.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Look, I'm getting a bit picky about going into public excluded. I do not see the justification for this one. I think people have a right to know what government is up to. I think there's just absolutely no grounds for it. If someone would like to put me right, that would be great, but I think people do have a right to know what's going on in this particular space. Thank you. So
sorry, can I please see the screen of people again, rather than sharing the, so I'd like to call for some officer advice around this, please.
Video now. This one here. Councillor Andy Matthews here. The reason why it's public excluded is as a general rule, property transaction papers are considered as public excluded under our current practices.
Thank you very much for that advice. Is there any further debate on this? Deputy Mayor Free and then Mayor Foster.
Would that still be the case if it's a public work acquisition? Or
I think, Councillor, where there are negotiations involved about with financial and commercial elements, yes, it would apply.
Oh, sorry, I went the wrong way. Mayor Foster.
Yes, so Andy, just to check, are we at the stage where everything is agreed, or are there still negotiations carrying on which would go to, dollars, conditions, anything of that nature, or is it all sort of signed, sealed, delivered and approved on the other side of the conversation as well?
I'd have to specifically confirm that, that Councillor, or Mayor, sorry. But
how long would it take you to do that?
Until a point in which the council or this committee has or council has agreed it, the matter still remains within negotiation. So as such, it's valid to have it still in a public excluded situation until the point at which that was agreed by council. Then after that, there's no reason subsequent to that, as we've had with other conversations of late around commercial matters, while the information surrounding that could not be released, there's no reason why it wouldn't be released.
Thank you.
Councillors, any further debate? Councillor Fitzsimons.
Yeah, having somewhat prematurely seconded this in my enthusiasm to get a coffee, I'm now sort of left wondering why it is in private, and agreeing with the concerns of Councillor Pan. I mean, it says the reasons are that somebody might get improper commercial gain or that there's commercial sensitivity. Can we maybe get some advice, perhaps over the tea break, about the nature of that and whether that is, and maybe can officers just reflect and look, I'm happy to be convinced, but I would be interested in the grounds on which that happens, because if it's just a matter of its usual process, then I don't think that applies for the legal tests. You have to consider each of them on their merits.
Is there a
during the tea break? We will do that during the tea break, Madam Chair.
Okay, in that case, because there are still outstanding questions that need to be answered, I won't take the vote yet. So what we will do is we will go to have morning tea, and then we'll come back after morning tea, and we will then get the answers to those questions, and then we can accordingly vote on going into public excluded. So what we're going to do is we're going to give ourselves 15 minutes, so that's 11:15, coming back. And so if you're needing to find out more information, make contact. I'm wondering whether we need to, maybe I think both Councillor Fitzsimons and Mayor Foster are both at council. They could potentially go and speak to staff if needed, and then come back and we'll get the information shared with us after our break. So thank you. Have 10 minutes. Remember to turn off your microphone and your video.
you're like me, Jill, you're in a sunny spot. I kept trying to avoid and close the curtains, and
I love it.
it's very nice to sit in, but it's not helping my visuals.
The weather has just been so stunning. We've been so lucky over the last few months.
I'm really glad it's warm because they're still trying to tar seal the Common Drive cycleway. I think it's happening tomorrow. I shall be down there sniffing the tar because I love projects. But the worry is normally at this time of year, it's not warm enough to tar seal. So I'm very grateful that it still is.
Yeah, I have to take my comments about Wellington weather back. I mean, I did live in London. The weather was pretty rough there. Calgary is really amazing. It gets down to -50, but because the ski slopes are so there, you actually want the winter to stay. And then in the summer, it's a very short summer, but the mountains melt and the hiking is just amazing. It's sort of the weather that actually kind of makes it. Dubai is really hot.
Isn't Calgary for rodeos and cowgirls?
All right.
Cowboys and girls.
What we're going to do is it's now 18 minutes past 11 and I want to get back underway, but I am just going to call for staff to give us some more information. And I understand that John Friends, who's been involved in this project, is also present to be able to help us understand why they have recommended this be public excluded. So if I can have the staff giving us some advice, and then I'll if there's any more debate.
Okay. Kia ora, Jill. I hope you can see me way at the end of the table here. It's Barbara speaking. So my advice is that it would be normal with most commercial transactions for a local authority to consider that transaction in public excluded under the terms of the Legoima section named at the top of this particular report. And then it would be normal, unless there's a good reason not to, for the resulting decision to become public. But one of the things I can say is I'm quite happy to look at this outside of this meeting and just ask the question where there are relatively non-controversial, easy style standard commercial transactions, whether we really need all of those in public excluded. That's the question we'll check. The other question I think I had was that because it's two public entities, in this case, why is it not public as a result of that? And the answer to that is the public nature of the two entities is not relevant. The relevant issue is that it is a commercial negotiation and transaction. And so what you do normally in public excluded is allow the council the opportunity to have a discussion in the interest of protecting the interests of this organisation and our ratepayers. So I hope that helps.
Councillors, are there any further questions? Councillor Pennant.
Thanks for that, Barbara. Sorry, look, I'm really mystified why two public entities shouldn't be transparent about their activities. Why have we now got such a deeply embedded ideology that they are businesses? They are not businesses, they're government. Yeah. And also, will you make this paper, if it does go into PE, will you make this paper public?
We would undoubtedly make the resulting decision public, which is the key. Look, in terms of the nature of public or private entity, under this legislation, that's just not relevant. What is relevant is whether the particular decision being made is subject to commercial sensitivity.
Are there any further questions, Mayor Foster?
Yeah, Barbara, so my interest was less on, I mean, I can understand that. I mean, if we had a difference in price, for example, or a difference in conditions or something like that, that would still be negotiated. I can completely understand why you wouldn't want to show your hand. Public or private entity makes no difference whatsoever. Question is, are all the conditions sorted? Are all the prices sorted? And if that is the case, then it would seem that it's less of a commercial negotiation. But if they are not sorted, then clearly it's still commercial.
Well, whether or not those things are sorted, it's clearly still a commercial transaction. But I think the point I'm making is that I suggest we allow this to happen today, But what we can do is consider and come back to you in future and advise whether we think that some of these more straightforward transactions really do need to continue to be in public excluded.
Councillors, are there any further questions? I can see there's no further questions. Is there any further debate? No? Okay, in which case I will put this motion, which has been moved and seconded, to the vote. So please vote accordingly.
That is passed by a vote of 10 to 5. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So that has been carried. So what we'll need to do now is just have a couple of minutes just for officers to make sure that we move into public excluded.
Can we just record that vote?
Record the division? Yep. Thank you. Did you catch that, Cyrus?